good morning, everyone, and welcome to our session for this morning. This morning we have a session titled Cybersecurity, Trust and Resilience, a European Perspective, and we have an exciting panel for you. So I'm going to introduce our panelists overall. So we have our moderator here, Lynn, Doan, Managing Editor, Bloomberg News. And we have two panelists for you today as well. Hans de Vries, Chief Cybersecurity and Operations Officer with the European Union Agency of Cybersecurity. There you go. And also Despina, Spanou, Deputy Director General, Cybersecurity and Trust, European Commission, who I believe has she arrived yet? Okay, she'll be here. She'll join once she arrives as well. So at this time, I'd like to welcome our panelists to the stage to take over and kick it off.
Oh, please, they mic'd me up to be on the left side.
Yeah, that's all right, but I'm a generous.
Thank you. And then I think maybe we'll leave a chair at the end for Despina.
Yeah.
We'll leave this for her? Okay.
This
you don't want to sit next to me? You don't have
I think that joke was done already. We're not going to do that one.
Well, Hans, it's a pleasure to be sitting with you and talking cybersecurity. What a landscape to be protecting today. You came a long way. I made that trip to Brussels. It's a long one, so maybe we should start there and just give you a chance to explain why you're here in San Francisco.
Well, if we're really talking about a long game, I flew in last Monday from Melbourne to Brussels and from Brussels to here, so I almost did the globe. But that's all right. Now, there's a lot happening right now, right? Cyber, let's say the IT, the way we all use the digital infrastructure, we cannot do without. And it's being targeted all the time. And so if we can work on that from a global perspective, but also focusing on Europe, we need to be vigilant. We need to make sure that the rules of the game are in such a way that's usable for all, for privacy, for critical infrastructure, for the supply chain, for making money, but keeping our lives working for all of us. So it's a lovely job to do, and that's fun.
Well, that sets me up well for the next question, because you've given an idea of what you're facing, but a lot of people in the room may not understand your specific role in the EU, what it entails, and even just as importantly, what it doesn't entail. So maybe you can lay that out, your responsibilities.
Yeah, sure. Now, we're sitting all the time like this, but I'd like to address the audience a bit more. My name is Hans. I work for the European Union, and that's working for ENISA, which is a European Agency on Cybersecurity. We are coordinating for the 27 member states within Europe. So you could say I have 27 customers. They're big customers, let me put it that way. So we focus on everything between strategy and certification, between crisis management, skills, exercises, trainings, but also the inner cooperation and collaboration between the different countries on cyber. Before I did that, I was 9 years the director of the National Cybersecurity Center, so I kind of know what's at stake there, and I see a good colleague sitting here. So I did the Netherlands, now I do Europe. That's the fun part. Cyber is crucially important for all of us. And how to do that is we need regulation that gives us the mandate to perform. Like everyone else, you need to have a legal base to actually perform your duties. And we also have quite some regulation that normally Despina would be talking about right now, is the rules of the game, which we call the NIS2, about the critical infrastructure. You all know that. That's a primary responsibility for ENISA, to help the member states implement those different parts like incident reporting and the request and the checks that has to be done on the companies and the trainings of the CEO and the boards. the CRA, Cyber Resilience Act. That is for all products with a digital element, and try to think one without. Might be a doll. Well, even the dolls speak. So you have to be careful with that. So we focus on those. And the main priority on the Cyber Resilience Act is the security by design and secure by default as a requirement for producing but also selling in the European Union. So the things that came out of the United States, together with Jenny Easterly, we talk very much so on security by design and security by default, about SBOM and things like that. That's crucially important. So we try to make sure that is not only a talk, but we walk the talk, we help implement, and we make sure that it's going to be implemented. The CRA is going to be active from the September 26th, so this year. And that means that it will have impact on businesses that want to sell in Europe. But it has impact on everyone, because we all depend on a higher cybersecurity level for products. And especially when you look at incidents. For instance, the network access software, the top 20 of those vendors cause more than 30% of all the incidents we have to deal with. So if they get their act together, we're all much better safer. So that's what we focus on.
That's a lot. I mean, it's a lot to oversee, and I want to get into a bit of the detail on what most concerns you.
Yes.
So of all of those areas that you're focused on, what is the biggest threat, the one that keeps you up at night today?
We do research, and we produce documents. They are freely downloadable from our website. One of them is the threat landscape. Mm-hmm. So it's inventory of what we see and what also we think the future is. And if you look at that, I'll get the numbers because...
handwritten.
Yeah, there's some of the numbers that you need to say. If you look at DDoS, it's about 77% as the dominant incident type. Only 2% of those have major impact, but it's a nuisance for everyone anyway. Hacktivism is causing about 80% of that. Wow. So a lot of youngsters that just have the credit card and then buy a DDoS because that's so much available right now, and it's a nuisance. So if you look at the leading access points, how to get into the organizations, the two major ones is phishing. You know, you click on a link that you're not supposed to, or it is the vulnerability exploitation. Meaning there is some software that has a problem, and because of misusing that type of vulnerability, you can have access that you normally would not have. So those are the two important parts. What we also see is the convergence of target groups, meaning they work together. Funnily enough, they can work together across the world. We have sometimes an issue with that. The growing role of AI and the impact. I think early 25, about 80% of all the social engineering was done through the use of AI even then, and I think 100% right now. Everyone is using that for the bad and the good. And of course, one of the older issues that is still there is compromising the outdated devices. You know, we all have perhaps an iPhone 3 or 6, or that's still functional, or you have a server from whatever Dell or whatever, doesn't really matter, but they're out of service and out of updates, but they're still being used as of today in the and have an internet facing, and then you're toast because they're going to misuse the possibilities within those software and hardware appliances to actually get in. So that's what you see. If I look at the targets, who is being targeted, about 40%, 38.2, is public administration. And then you will have the transport sector, supply chain, digital infrastructure, all about 7 or 5%. So you will have the parts that we all took care of or wanted to take care of I am so happy. Please join us, Despina. So one of the things that we see is that the incidents in the different sectors, etc., is the part that we cover on with the NIS2. So there's a lot of happening right there, and we need regulations, and we need strict, clear rules to be used in getting the quality to a higher level and get everyone to a higher level of cybersecurity. And that's our motto, that's our mandate, that's also our drive. Get everyone every day on a higher level.
Well, Despina can talk more about those rules that you were referencing once she's up on stage, but I do want to delve a bit into what you talked about on AI. So you covered the fact that you believe that at this point, AI is used in what, 100% of social engineering?
Yeah, that's my estimate.
At this point, how else are you seeing AI tools being used in breach attempts?
It's hard to detect, let's face it, let's do that. And the second thing I also should say is that if we're talking about incident handling itself, that's not done by ENISA, that's done by the member states because it's a national prerogative to do that. My dear, good to see you.
I'm so sorry.
So what you see is that since AI is so new, the bad guys can try out and find out that something is working and something is not, but we have to make sure that it's between strict security measures to make sure that it fits within the organizational usage. So as always, we have a handicap on that level. But it's also a possibility. There's so much possible with the AI part. From old, and I saw some people that I know for many, many years, we did scripting because scripting is very helpful, etc. And then we called it data mining, and now we call it AI, but in fact, it's a similar thing, right? So you use vast amount of data to do fine stuff. The new thing is the fully automated processes.
The agentic.
The agentic part, and the impact of that. It's the speed of light that things change, and then the first question comes: how do you certify? How do you detect? How do you stop when it's morphing all the time, or it's finding ways? That's, I think, the scary, but also the interesting part: how to deal with that in the future.
So is your office using agentic AI in order to counter?
I will not comment on our modus of operandi.
Take that as a yes. Despina, welcome to the stage. Thanks so much for joining us. You know, one thing that Hans was talking about were the tech vendors and the fact that just a small concentration are responsible for breaches through vulnerability exploitations of their systems. Wanted to bring you into the conversation to talk about the rules and regulations upcoming that will address, you know, the vendors within companies' supply chains and the vulnerability that they pose.
Thank you very much. My apologies to everyone who have honored us with your presence. I didn't mean to be rude. Yes, I mean, the supply chain issues, I think, are the issues that are going to keep us the most busy. Now, it's nothing new. In Europe, where we have regulated high cybersecurity standards for critical infrastructure, we have already provided rules about scrutinizing what goes in your supply chain. The NIS2 directive, which is the principal cybersecurity law governing critical infrastructure in the EU, in 27 countries, already provides some guidance to that. But we had not gone very deep in addressing the real issue, which is when certain dependencies become vulnerabilities, and when you have known high-risk suppliers in your systems, what do you do with it? So in the most recent proposal for a new Cybersecurity Act in the European Union, we proposed a framework for a gradual approach, basically, of ensuring that our ICT supply chain is based on trusted vendors. So we have to look at it positively rather than from the negative side. This is about making sure you have trusted vendors, and this is about making sure everybody knows the rules of the game. This is an approach that is based on risk assessment, so it is not done blindly or on the basis just of information. In the EU, we have great experience in carrying out collective risk assessments between our 27 countries. ENISA is part of that work as well, our EU Cybersecurity Agency. And we have already done a lot of work in this respect with 5G mobile networks, as you know, where on the basis of a toolbox, many member states in the EU have de-risked basically mobile networks of 5G. So now we go a step further and we say we will apply an approach that is legally binding. And it is an approach starting with risk assessments and identifying key assets that you would need to basically remove from your supply chain. And then we take a country-based approach, so listing third countries that can pose cybersecurity concerns, and then identifying high-risk suppliers. Basically, suppliers coming from that country become automatically high-risk suppliers. Unless there is an exception, they can prove that they do not meet the criteria of the legislation, which are very, very precise, and you can imagine where they go and what countries we're talking about. So this is not something that will happen from one day to the next. And in some cases, in some markets, it can have dramatic impacts. In some markets, our dependencies can go up to 70, 80% on high-risk suppliers. So what are you going to do? So this is the idea behind the risk assessments. We have already provided also a list of priority areas in our proposal. In the areas of detection equipment, where we know the dependencies are very high, but super important. Can you imagine? I mean, in the EU, we reach 70 to 80% dependence on high-risk suppliers from a certain country. This is all the data about all our trade goes in. No? This is the detection equipment across, our borders, in our ports, in our airports, you name it. Electricity and energy, also a major issue. The stories about solar inverters, for instance, etc. So this is also a priority area. Connected and automated vehicles that have a lot of components that can come from high-risk suppliers, etc. So it is a global framework that is based always on risk assessments and an agreement from all the countries involved.
I mean, I can imagine some of the names and some of the countries that you're talking about in terms of high risk, Huawei being one that the EU has spoken a lot about, but they're so pervasive, as you say, they're embedded in everything. Are there enough alternative vendors out there in order to fill the void if you're trying to de-risk that segment from your supply chain?
I mean, in some markets, there are. When it came to mobile networks, the reason why we could go so fast and the toolbox already produced so much of an outcome was exactly that there were alternatives. But I do believe that this process that we have put now in place, once agreed by the co-legislator, of course, it's just a proposal from us, but the reception has so far been positive. I think it will lead to a new approach also to a new cybersecurity industrial policy. Because we will need to see where we need to invest. Semiconductors is a very good example. The EU has already taken steps with creating a market and incentives in the area of chips. In an upcoming tech sovereignty package, we will take that even further. So I think that this is an opportunity for everyone. And it is an opportunity for the like-minded to work together, possibly. It's an opportunity for new alliances between the like-minded. It's not going to be from one day to the next, but it's a very solid beginning.
You talked a bit about critical infrastructure. And Hans, I wanted to bring you back into the conversation to talk about the biggest concerns when it comes to critical infrastructure and protecting them in your region. What do you see on a day-to-day basis as the largest targets? Are they water systems, power grids? How has that evolved over the years?
I think public administration currently is the biggest being attacked in that sense. And that could be for any reason, because you don't, let's say, agree with a certain decision that was made on a local base, and then you still do DDoS, or state-sponsored infiltration and everything in between. So I think the other part that's really underrated is FIMI, the foreign interference through media and with all kinds of publications, to try to influence democratic processes and things like that. That is the thing that will continue. You see that if you follow the last few years, that part is strongly on the minds of some of the states and some of the, let's call them states, that want to influence the outcome of the elections. And then you see a lot of untruthiness about incidents. And so that part that is actually using techniques and using AI to actually get a certain wrong message across is definitely one of the part. And the supply chain in general. If you look at, for instance, the Jaguar incident that they had in the UK, or in the Netherlands, a biomedical testing facility that was hacked, the impact, the societal impact or economic impact is huge. With Jaguar, they were offline for 3 weeks, and it had a EU single market effect because so many vendors that were selling or producing parts were also affected at that level.
Some of them at risk of going out of business.
Yeah, so it has huge impact. And then imagine that Jaguar is not even a critical infrastructure,
right.
But it has huge impact. And for the biomedical testing, I mean, that was about breast cancer and things like that. So all the medical data, and that was quite a lot because it was a mechanism that was used all across the Netherlands. That data was also published because they didn't want to pay for the ransomware. And if you look at that, how do I say that correctly? The mentality of the hackers to actually then publish all that type of data knowing that it's so sensitive, it's unbelievable.
It's brutal.
It's brutal. And I know of an earlier case in Finland where that type of information was even used to try to extort the peoples that were doubly affected at that level. You're really sick in your mind if you do things like that. But that is sadly part of the problem that we have to deal with. What we want to make sure is that the IT that we all use, and we all use that right now, I see laptops and I see iPads and phones, we want to make sure that it is safe to use. And safe in the sense that you know that the data that you are putting in is there for you to keep and to use. And of course, law enforcement plays a role at that level as well, to make sure that we can catch the bad guys. And I know Europol is here, and I want to congratulate them with all the different end games and researches that have been happening there, because that also brings a dent into their financial systems and mechanisms to make money and then do. My last remark would be that if you look at the criminal side of it, I think it's the second largest industry, sadly, at the moment. So we're talking about billions of revenues out of this. And
What is the first largest?
Well, it was the second one I read the report, but first or second, it's humongous.
So you spoke about the geopolitics of it.
Did I?
Well, the election, the effort to interfere and influence elections, and that does remind me that I wanted to ask about how these attacks and hacking campaigns have evolved since the Russia-Ukraine war, and what kind of threat, or how you view the threats from Russia today versus pre-war.
I want to stay out of the geopolitics side. I just want to say is that within Europe, you see that the importance of the democratic processes to select your new government and things like that is extremely important for democracy. So what we do within Europe, and ENISA is part of that, is to inform when something is happening on a technical level that we think that might have an impact. And we had it with Romania and others, helping out to make sure that the election can be safe and secure, so people can actually vote their voices, and then you have a certain outcome. And I'd leave it at that.
Give us a concrete example of what you have seen in terms of attempts to influence these kind of elections. Or is there one that really stands out to you as especially emblematic of that ongoing threat?
I think it's more in a general sense that people want to influence. It's from old. right? So you want to make sure that people understand what your view is, and you want to vocalize that, etc. But then, from my perspective, it should also be truthfulness, in the sense that truth and trust is the most important thing in the world. So if you want to have a communication about what you think is important, then it should be also true. So that's, let me keep it at that.
Despina, I wanted to go back to the critical infrastructure question. I mean, subsea cables are front of mind for us in the news business because some of them have been stalled as part of the war that we're seeing between the U.S. and Israel and Iran. And I want to ask you if you can touch on some of the policies and regulations that are in the works in the EU to protect subsea cables and other pieces of physical infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the work we do on cybersecurity now has changed dramatically. Until recently, critical infrastructure was about all that we do through NIS2 and the classic, these 18 sectors and the rules they have to comply with. We still have a lot of work to do there. It's not yet done, but it's no longer just about that. So there are two areas where we have indeed extended our work, and subsea cables is one of them. The other one is drones. So because we see that this hybrid warfare that is taking place in the world is a lot about those areas. And with subsea cables carrying out 99%, I think, of the internet traffic across the two continents, we cannot afford mistakes. So we adopted last year an action plan that is based on the pillars of preventing, detecting, and responding, which is based also on a lot on collaboration and creating capacity in Europe to deal with the threats, to deal with the incidents, but also to be prepared with alternatives so that you do not have single points of failure. And I think that is our utmost concern right now and our objective. We have then copied and pasted this approach for drones and countering drone threats after the recent sightings in Europe that have disturbed our airspace in many member states, actually, in many countries. So it's a very similar approach. So this is the new critical infrastructure. And in fact, in our proposal for the supply chain chapter that I mentioned in the Cybersecurity Act, these areas are also covered as priority areas we will also need to de-risk because there are also elements there that we need to take care of.
Yeah, that drone supply chain is actually heavily dependent upon overseas manufacturers.
Yes, you got
is
it
that right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
How does, I mean, you keep coming back to the idea of the high-risk vendors and like the idea that it's really, it's really important to the EU to de-risk it. How does that coincide with the EU's effort underway for other reasons to like, you know, adopt their own sovereign tech stack? What does that mean for the likes of Microsoft and Amazon and the other American companies that have large business in the EU? Well,
I mean, there are two sides in that coin. The first is that Europe will always be an open market. We will always be trade partners with our allies, with our like-minded countries, and in technology, you can't do otherwise anyway, because we're complementary, because we need each other, and I think that will never stop. But the other side of the coin is that the age of innocence is over. As President Ursula von der Leyen has said very clearly, it's time for independence as well. And what does that mean in real terms? We are now, I'm here with my colleague Christiane Kierkegaard, who's the Director for Cybersecurity and Trust in the European Commission. I'm Deputy Director General of the Technology Department. I mean, what we propose to our President is clear rules as to how this game should be played. Whoever wants to offer services in the EU must know clearly how this should be offered, which are our criteria, which are our terms. It's not about stopping anyone from offering their services. But at the same time, we're clearing up our dependencies from high-risk suppliers. This is the idea. Here we're talking about creating a market of trusted vendors. The tech sovereignty package of actions and policy proposals that will come later this year, it will consist exactly of that set of rules in the areas of cloud and AI, semiconductors, and how the European market needs to shape itself so that if there's a need to be independent, we can work with our partners to be so.
So there are probably a lot of companies, I think I see some in the room here, that would love to work in the EU, but are based in the
always
US
welcome.
and are subject to US policy and regulation here, and would be subject to EU regulation policy if they were to come and do business there. What do you see as the biggest, like the chief differences between American policy and regulation and EU policy and regulation when it comes to cyber that they should keep in mind if they're talking about doing business in the region?
Well, I mean, the ecosystem is very different in cybersecurity between the two sides of the Atlantic, but it has always worked. It is a challenge sometimes, but US companies operating in Europe can count on us to make sure that the rules we have create a level playing field for them in 27 countries. There's no other part of the world where you can have the same rules for 27 sovereign countries and give that legal certainty to a company. So at least we have taken care of that. These companies have an interest to come in Europe because they know there's one set of rules for 27 different countries that they do business with. So far, we don't hear complaints about that. The complaints are sometimes about certain aspects of the rules, and this is where our simplification exercise comes in. Right now in Europe, we have a couple of such proposals for simplifying NIS2 for companies so that operators do not have to comply with 27 different systems of demonstrating compliance. We are proposing single entry points for reporting incidents because we have multiple pieces of legislation that require reporting. So we try to simplify things through very concrete legislative proposal. I think, again, we're the only part of the world that does everything through regulation, but that's our way of giving a level playing field to stakeholders who want to operate in Europe.
I'm sure that's a welcome message to everyone in the room. Hans, I did want to come back to you on what Despina talked about on the US and EU policies actually being more alike than different. There is a historical relationship between the US and the EU in coordinating on cyber responses, on like proactively sharing information. What does that look like today? How is
that still continues.
Strong.
This morning I had contact with CISA. So there is a continuous process of collaboration and connection. One of the things that we're currently working on is strengthening the importance of the CVE process. We all know that is a process where the vulnerabilities are being mentioned, given a number, so it's being recognized. It's a 16 billion industry. And we want to make sure that it's strengthened in such a way that it's a global process. And on Thursday, we will talk about that. And if you look at that mechanism, ENISA is a CNA, it's going to be a root CNA, it's going to be a top-level root CNA within the future. And we want to make sure that it is a global process because everyone depends on that. Now, why we do that is we have received an obligation from the NIS2 and the CRA to make sure that there is a mechanism, what we call the European Vulnerability Database, and we also have a exploited vulnerabilities process. What we find is important is that it is harmonized with what's happening here in the United States. And that's a crucial part because we all depend on that process. We're not going to create a separate entity and we have to discuss that. No, it should be harmonized at that. And we are currently working. I've received from both the Commission and the 27 member states the urgent request, help fix this. So we're going to do that. So I'm looking forward to work with that. Now we also have the ransomware initiative for many years about talking about incidents and how you deal with that from a law perspective. And there are so many different groups that talk with each other concerning incidents and how to fix that. I'm happy that Alan Friedman is here talking about SBOM. We can work together on making sure that this global process continued. I'm happy to do so. So that would be the answer for that. I just want to come back a little bit on FIMI. The External Action Service has done a report. It's the 4th report. So if you want to have any idea of what it is, please read that report for all of you. ENISA does not play a role at that level because that's a different setup and different mechanisms. But they do a good job on trying to track that. So if you want to have more information on that, go to the External Action Service, their 4th national or international report that they produced on FIMI.
Great, that's an excellent recommendation. We only have, 15 minutes left here, and I wanted to open it up to the room. If anybody has questions, there's a mic in the middle of the room here. If anybody wanted to come up and ask anything.
Who dares?
Well, we'll keep having our conversation.
I have a
until
question
brave
for the
soul-
audience.
Ooh, Despina, I like that. Turn the tables.
If there was one piece of the EU legislation that companies would like to change, what would that be?
Is there a brave soul who
Paolo,
wants to come
come
up
on.
to the mic?
Paolo, come on.
and
Or
tell-
otherwise, forever you shall not speak. Everything we do is great otherwise.
Yeah, I like that. I like that part. So speak up now or be silent forever. I mean,
One, and it's in the common criteria, trying to understand. Common criteria is supposed to be common, but we're finding more and more there are specific differences between different, and EU is coming up now with the EU common criteria as well, the EUCC. So trying to figure out, is it really going to be common, and how can we get one that helps us with all of that, or which ones are the ones to choose?
Despina, maybe you can unpack the common criteria first and then answer the question.
Well, for the common criteria was the very first European certification scheme. And the aim of having a certification framework in Europe was exactly to get rid of this fragmented approach. But because it was the only common approach for certification in Europe, we thought, okay, why don't we make sure we all agree to turn it up into and it is the first and I think the only successful framework so far, because our certification framework was so complicated that we didn't manage to do much more with it. This is why in the new Cybersecurity Act we proposed a couple of months ago, we have proposed to modernize this certification system. So the good news is that this will not take away the common criteria, so can start being of use. And the other piece of good news is that under the new framework, ENISA will have a role in monitoring the use of all the schemes and making sure they update them and they modernize them if need be. So that will make their use even more dynamic and uniform, if I dare say so. It's another brave gentleman.
Yes, he's going to have recommendations for you.
You're welcome.
good day, sir.
Can I ask a question? Sorry. So I'm Frank from the University of Canberra in Australia. I'm catching your hands on your remark that you just came from Melbourne. So I'm really wondering what Australia could learn from the EU when it comes to cybersecurity, or the other way around.
That's a daunting question.
Thank you.
I was in Melbourne for holidays, so that's a different thing. So I wasn't in Canberra this time.
Visit us next.
What I see is that the oceanic approach of cooperation with Australia, and I will put New Zealand there as well, that's a very Western focus, but they have their own specialities and mechanisms. I think they're very effective at what they and how they organize things. So the Australian Cybersecurity Centre and the way they have in the different aspects, I really like that. Because then they have the combination of industry with intelligence and also the users together in centers. I would love to have that in. So we can learn from them as well in that sense. So I'd like to keep it at that. I think one aspect is that the reach out to everyone to stay combined, cooperative, and is a call for everyone. We all depend on the IT prospect, etc. So we have a split setup within the world. It will not be good for all. So, so my approach would be keep approaching each other on that sense. From the EU, I know that there are EU-Australia talks, like the EU-UK talks or EU-United States talks, to make sure that we are on the same mindset at that level, and I think that needs to be continued with Australia as well.
should Australia become a member of the EU.
Oh.
Well, you participate in the Eurovision Song Contest. That's already
That's a good
start.
start.
Yeah. And doing pretty well at that as well.
It's a start.
Well, no, I think just a few days ago there was a signing by the Commission with a cooperation on Australia. Just a few days ago. And cybersecurity cooperation and threat intel sharing is part of that.
Yeah.
Well, I'll insert another question here to address one little elephant in the room, which is, you talked about how big of a target the public sector is.
Yeah.
Government agencies themselves, you're not just out there protecting, institutions. Well, this is actually your primary, core to your job is the governments and working with them. They become such a large target, and even the EU isn't immune to that.
Sure.
Just a couple of months ago, the EU disclosed that there was a data breach from within that affected some employee information being compromised. What does that challenge of protecting the EU and the agencies within look like on a day-to-day basis? Just like give us a glimpse of.
Let me first say, ENISA is focusing on member states, and there is another organization called CertEU, and they focus on the EU institutions. They do a very good job. That's let's say one, they do a very good job. Two, every organization have incidents and possibility to get into the information, so do we. So it's not so much the question, are you being attacked? The question is, do you detect?
Yeah.
And what I know is that it was detected and fixed within a day. And that is a compliment. So we all know that there are issues. Whatever technique has been used, it doesn't really matter. The moment they are in the system, you need to get rid of them as soon as possible. They did that within a day. That means they have quality, and I'd leave it at that.
So,
Yes, Despina.
as institutions, especially the European Commission, we like to apply what we preach to the others. And I'm very glad to say that Christiane here is the director for cybersecurity, was behind our effort to have a particular regulation on cybersecurity for EU institutions and agencies, in which we basically apply the same principles that we apply and we request should be applied by critical infrastructure in Europe. So what we ask for public administration in Europe through NIS2, we apply for European institutions. So we need to meet very high levels of cybersecurity, and we try to do our best. And we will have to also follow through with the Cybersecurity Act on de-risking from high-risk suppliers. So we have to champion what we preach. And that applies also to our agencies. That does not mean we are immune from data breaches or other types of attacks. Yes, recently there was one, but we're managing it. We have our own CERT. We have an emergency response team that is for all the institutions. So we operate like a company under NIS2, basically. That's the way it is.
Everybody is vulnerable.
Oh yes, and we are. It's very interesting because we never had major incidents with EU agencies, and the first time we had a data breach was on the occasion of the first application for the vaccines during COVID. So it shows you that when there is an interest, there is a way. Yeah.
Of course, always. And we wouldn't need policy and regulation if everybody was doing it right. So my question for you, and this is probably at the root of where you author, legislation, is like, what are companies in Europe still getting wrong about cybersecurity? What are they still not taking seriously enough?
I think it wouldn't be fair to say what you're getting wrong. I think our encouragement from what we see is that we need to get over this risk-benefit analysis in investing in cybersecurity. So companies thinking that, especially in Europe, we have a lot of small and medium-sized companies. And them thinking, well, if it happens, I will pay, and it's going to cost less than if I invest. That has to stop because the impact is so huge, and it's not just on one. It's broader than this. So I think this is where we're coming, and now we've done it through legislation, but it will have to become a serious part of the discussion.
So they still need to be more proactive.
Well, they need to apply the rules
Yeah.
throughout and see the interest in protecting the critical infrastructure and their own infrastructure. And the challenge is to protect inside and outside, meaning that what is important is not just to protect your information systems, but in general your business, because attacks are also of hybrid nature. And we've seen that now in the current conflicts.
Yeah.
You can protect your systems if you're energy providers, but if you're hit from outside, you need to have backup plans. So the issue is wider than that, and I think this is where European policymaking is concentrating today, in adapting on these needs for modern approach. And I want to come back and say something, because you discussed ransomware extensively with Hans. Companies also should be helped, because it's one thing to tell them what they have to do. We also need to support them. ENISA is doing a great job in that, in the capacity building exercise. But we want some practical help. And this is why in the Cybersecurity Act, we have proposed the creation of a help desk on ransomware. With ransomware being such a pest today, it continues to be a real threat, and it is enabled by agentic AI that has multiplied and proliferated this kind of incidents. So we have proposed that ENISA works with Europol, and we have the head of cybercrime, the cybercrime unit, AC3, here with us from Europol, because they have extensive experience in bringing down ransomware. To create a help desk for companies to address themselves if they're hit and get immediate and quick help.
Hans, you wanted to touch on that same question?
Yeah. Having heard what Despina says and understanding it fully why everything is needed, the principle that we still need to get right is that what we're talking about is not an IT thing that is for the CISO or the IT director. It is Chefsache, meaning it's board responsibility for everyone. And I think that is still something that is being missed. Let's face it, most board members are 50 and up, right? Just look at the numbers, they're older because of their experience, etc., but they haven't grown into the IT dependencies and mechanisms. They sometimes, several I meet, they fully understand it, but some, they think still it's an IT thing. And it's not. It's a resilience question. It is about, you do firefighting tests within your organization, but you don't do a cybersecurity breach test. Why not? That one is probably more important than the fire. You have a medical check once in a while to see whether, when there's something, has a heart attack or something like that in your company, you need to be drilled how to deal with that. Well, you need to be drilled upon cybersecurity as well. I think that part and the impact, the societal impact you will have, you could have the moment your company is hit and then your products or services are not being rendered anymore. That part needs to instill as a necessity to do business. It's not optional anymore. It's a necessity.
And needs to come from the top, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
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 There was
I think
a
there
lady who wanted to ask a question.
Yes, I think there was a question that somebody wanted to pose. I don't know if that's still outstanding. Maybe Despina answered it, or Hans.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, well, we only have one more minute, so if anybody has one last, here we go. Last question before we end the panel.
Can you talk a little bit about the process for the CSA2 and when that might be finalized?
Sure. So this is a typical process of EU co-legislation between the European Parliament and the member states. We have already advanced in our discussions with the governments on the part of the member states. So we're reading through the proposal, and so far we have seen a very positive reception, I must admit, on the mandate of ENISA, on the new certification framework, and on the supply chain. We know that on the supply chain there will be a lot of discussions on the issue of 5G, because there we're proposing already a transition period for removing high-risk suppliers from mobile networks, and we are also touching upon fixed networks. So I think that could delay a little bit the discussions. The Parliament has already appointed the responsible members of the Parliament, and they have started their work. I think we will start seeing crystallized common approaches after the summer, I would say. And the first Cybersecurity Act was concluded in terms of negotiations within a year. I don't know if we will manage that same
Speed.
success, because that was very success. It's rare. Usually negotiations for EU legislation take approximately 2 years. So I think there is an urgency about these issues, and the current situation demonstrates that we need to act fast. So I remain hopeful.
Well, we're wishing you the best of luck on that process.
Thank you very
and
much.
Thank you so much
And thank you all for being
the
here for
conversation.
us. Thank you. Thank you.